It was one of those quiet evenings you don't think much about until something happens that changes everything. In the small town of Millridge, life moved at a slow pace. People knew each other by name, and nothing ever seemed out of place. Until it did. That evening, Maya Thompson, a young woman with dreams as big as her heart, decided to visit her friend Alex, who lived in an accessible cabin near the woods. This wasn't just any cabin. It was specially designed for people with disabilities. Ramps instead of stairs, wide doorways, and plenty of space made it easy for anyone using a wheelchair to feel comfortable. For Maya, who had been using a wheelchair since a car accident left her paralyzed years ago, this cabin was more than just a building. It felt like home away from home. Maya loved spending time there. It reminded her of simpler days before life got so complicated. She drove up to the cabin in her adapted car, humming along to her favorite playlist. Everything seemed normal. But what happened next would shake not only her world but also the entire town, and eventually the country. As she pulled into the driveway, headlights bouncing off the trees lining the road, she noticed someone walking toward her car. At first, she thought maybe it was Alex coming outside to greet her early. But when the figure stepped closer, she realized it wasn't Alex, it was Officer Greg Dawson, a man whose reputation around town wasn't exactly glowing. He had a history of being short-tempered and quick to judge, especially when dealing with minorities or people he deemed suspicious. There were whispers among neighbors about how he treated folks during routine traffic stops, but no one dared say anything too loud. After all, he wore a badge, and challenging authority wasn't something most people in Millridge were eager to do. Dawson approached Maya's car, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone sharp and accusatory. Maya blinked, caught off guard by the hostility in his voice. "I'm visiting my friend," she replied calmly, gesturing toward the cabin behind him. "I've been here before. Is there a problem?" But Dawson didn't seem interested in explanations. Instead, he squinted at her, leaning closer to the driver's side window. His eyes scanned her face, then lingered on her wheelchair, visible through the open door of her vehicle. Something shifted in his expression. Whether it was frustration, annoyance, or plain prejudice, Maya couldn't tell. "Step out of the car," he ordered abruptly. Maya frowned. "Sir, I can't step out. I use a wheelchair. You see that, right?" Her words didn't seem to register with him, or maybe they did, but he chose to ignore them. Without another word, he reached for the car door, yanking it open wider. Panic bubbled inside Maya as she tried to explain herself again, her voice rising slightly. "Please, sir, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just here to see my friend." But Dawson wasn't listening anymore. In a move that shocked even himself later, he grabbed her arm roughly and dragged her out of the car. The impact of hitting the ground knocked the wind out of her lungs. Pain shot through her body as she landed awkwardly, her wheelchair tipping over beside her. Her phone slipped from her hand, shattering on the pavement. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, watching in stunned silence. Some wanted to help, but fear kept them rooted in place. No one wanted to be the next target of Dawson's anger. What Dawson didn't know, and what no one else standing there realized either, was that Maya wasn't just any ordinary citizen. She was close friends with two of the biggest names in entertainment, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and John Sina. They weren't just celebrities to her, they were genuine friends who cared deeply about fairness and justice. And once they found out what happened that night, things were going to change for everyone involved. For now, though, Maya lay on the cold ground trying to catch her breath. Tears stung her eyes, not just from the physical pain but from the humiliation of being treated like a criminal simply because she existed differently. Little did she know this moment would spark a chain reaction that would reach far beyond the borders of Millridge. It didn't take long for word to spread about what happened that night. One of Maya's neighbors, shaken but unable to stay silent, had recorded part of the incident on their phone from a safe distance. The shaky footage showed Officer Dawson yanking open Maya's car door, grabbing her arm and pulling her out onto the ground. It wasn't perfect. Parts of it were blurry, and you could hear muffled voices in the background, but it was enough to make people stop and pay attention. The video went viral almost overnight. Someone uploaded it to social media with the caption, "This cop attacked a disabled woman just because she was visiting her friend. What kind of world are we living in?" That single post sparked a firestorm. Within hours, hashtags like "Justice for Maya" and "Disabled Lives Matter" started trending. People all over the country watched the clip, their reactions ranging from disbelief to outrage. Comments flooded in, calling for accountability and demanding answers from the Mill Ridge Police Department. What made the situation even more explosive was who Maya really was, or rather, who her friends were. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and John Cena weren't just casual acquaintances. They were people Maya had built a genuine connection with over the years. They'd met through mutual connections at a charity event focused on supporting artists with disabilities. Both men admired Maya's passion for advocacy and her ability to turn pain into purpose. She wasn't just someone they knew casually. She was family. When news of the incident reached them, neither man hesitated to act. The Rock saw the video first, his face tightening as he replayed it multiple times. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His hands clenched into fists as he thought about how terrified Maya must have felt in that moment. Without wasting a second, he opened Twitter and typed out a message that would soon go viral itself. "This is unacceptable," he wrote. "No one deserves to be treated this way, especially not someone as strong and inspiring as Maya. We're handling this personally. Stay tuned." John Cena followed suit shortly after, posting his own heartfelt statement. "I've known Maya for years, and she's one of the most resilient people I've ever met. For anyone to treat her or anyone with such disrespect is disgusting. Enough is enough." Their posts lit up the internet. Fans of both superstars rallied behind Maya, flooding social media with messages of support. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines like "Racist Cop Attacks Disabled Woman, Celebrities Demand Justice." Suddenly, what had started as a quiet evening in a small town became a national conversation about police brutality, discrimination, and the treatment of disabled individuals. For Maya, the sudden spotlight was overwhelming. She spent the next few days mostly in bed, trying to process everything that had happened. Her body still ached from the fall, but it was the emotional toll that weighed heaviest on her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dawson's face looming over her, heard the sound of her phone shattering on the pavement. Sleep came in short bursts, interrupted by nightmares that left her drenched in sweat. But she wasn't alone. Friends and supporters poured in from every corner of her life. Some sent texts and calls, others dropped by with food or flowers. And then there were The Rock and John Cena, who stayed in constant contact, checking in on her and offering whatever help they could. Their presence meant more than words could express. Knowing that two of the biggest names in entertainment believed in her gave Maya a sense of strength she hadn't felt before. One afternoon, while scrolling through social media, Maya came across a comment thread filled with stories from other disabled individuals who had faced similar mistreatment. One person talked about being ignored during a medical emergency because doctors assumed they couldn't communicate clearly. Another shared how they'd been denied access to public spaces despite having legal rights. Reading these accounts broke Maya's heart, but it also ignited something inside her. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a much larger problem. She realized that her experience wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed, belittled, or harmed because of who they were or how they lived. If she could use her voice to shine a light on these issues, maybe something good could come out of all this pain. Meanwhile, back in Mill Ridge, Officer Dawson found himself under intense scrutiny. His colleagues distanced themselves from him, pretending they barely knew him when reporters showed up asking questions. The police chief issued a vague statement promising an internal investigation, but no one trusted that anything meaningful would come of it. Locals whispered behind closed doors, debating whether Dawson's actions reflected broader problems within the department. Some defended him, saying he was just doing his job, while others argued that his behavior was inexcusable regardless of the circumstances. As the days turned into weeks, pressure mounted. Protesters gathered outside the police station holding signs that read, "Accountability now" and "Protect our community." Local activists organized rallies, inviting speakers to share their experiences with law enforcement. Even some retired officers joined the movement, admitting that systemic issues needed to be addressed if real change was going to happen. Through it all, Maya tried to focus on healing, not just physically, but emotionally. She leaned heavily on her support system, drawing strength from the people around her. Her friendship with The Rock and John Cena deepened as they worked together to strategize next steps. Together, they decided to file a formal complaint against Officer Dawson and push for broader reforms within the police department. As the wheels of justice began turning, Maya allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could lead to something better, not just for her, but for everyone who deserved to live without fear of being treated unfairly. Filing a formal complaint against Officer Dawson wasn't just about seeking justice for Maya. It was about sending a message that no one, regardless of their badge or authority, was above the law. With The Rock and John Cena standing firmly by her side, Maya knew she wasn't alone in this fight. But even with their support, the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Legal battles are messy, complicated, and often exhausting. And yet Maya felt ready, or as ready as anyone could be when facing something so daunting. The first step was finding the right lawyer. Word travels fast in activist circles, and it didn't take long for recommendations to come pouring in. One name kept coming up, an attorney known for taking on tough civil rights cases. She had a reputation for being relentless, compassionate, and unafraid to challenge powerful institutions. When Maya met her for the first time, she immediately felt at ease. This wasn't someone who would back down. This was someone who understood the stakes and was willing to fight tooth and nail. With her legal team assembled, Maya's lawyer wasted no time diving into the details. They started by gathering evidence, everything from the viral video to witness statements from neighbors who had seen what happened that night. Some of those neighbors had been hesitant to come forward initially, fearing retaliation, but when they saw how many people were rallying behind Maya, including two global superstars, they found the courage to speak up. Their accounts painted a clear picture. Officer Dawson hadn't acted out of necessity or self-defense. He had acted out of prejudice and anger, targeting Maya simply because she was different. But the investigation didn't stop there. Maya's lawyer wanted to dig deeper, looking beyond this single incident to uncover patterns of misconduct within the Millridge Police Department. It didn't take long to find troubling information. Over the years, several complaints had been filed against officers in the department, alleging racial profiling, excessive force, and outright discrimination. Most of these complaints had gone unresolved, swept under the rug by higher-ups eager to protect their own. Now, thanks to Maya's case, those buried grievances were finally seeing the light of day. As the legal process unfolded, The Rock and John Cena continued to use their platforms to keep the pressure on. They appeared together in interviews, speaking passionately about the need for accountability and reform. During one particularly memorable segment, The Rock leaned forward in his chair, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Let me tell you something, folks," he said, locking eyes with the camera. "If you think wearing a badge gives you permission to treat people like garbage, we're coming for you. No exceptions." John Cena nodded in agreement, adding his own thoughts. "This isn't just about Maya. It's about every person who's ever been treated unfairly because of how they look, move, or live. We have a responsibility to stand up and say enough is enough." Their words resonated deeply, not just with fans, but with everyday people who had grown tired of seeing injustice go unchecked. Hashtags like "Disabled Lives Matter" and "End Police Brutality" trended worldwide, sparking conversations about systemic inequality and the urgent need for change. People shared their own stories online, recounting moments where they'd been mistreated by law enforcement or denied basic dignity because of their disabilities. What started as a single incident in a small town had blossomed into a movement, uniting voices from all walks of life. Back in Millridge, the atmosphere was tense. Officer Dawson had been suspended pending investigation, But that didn't mean everyone was happy about it. Some residents grumbled about cancel culture and accused Maya of exaggerating the situation. Others defended Dawson, insisting he was just doing his job. Meanwhile, members of the police department tried to distance themselves from the controversy, issuing vague statements about reviewing protocols while avoiding any real accountability. For Maya, navigating this storm of opinions was emotionally draining. Every news article, every comment section, every heated debate felt like another weight pressing down on her shoulders. There were moments when she wondered if she was strong enough to see this through. But then she'd think about all the people counting on her, the ones who couldn't fight back, the ones whose voices had been silenced, and she'd remind herself why she was doing this. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating a world where no one else had to endure what she had. Her friends rallied around her during these tough times. The Rock sent daily messages of encouragement, reminding her that she wasn't fighting alone. Sina called regularly, offering advice and sharing stories of his own struggles with standing up for what's right. Even strangers reached out, sending letters and gifts to show their support. One package arrived with a handmade card that read, "You're stronger than you know and your courage is changing lives." Reading those words brought tears to Maya's eyes, not sad ones, but hopeful ones. As weeks turned into months, preparations for the trial began in earnest. Maya worked closely with her legal team, reviewing documents, practicing testimony, and preparing for whatever might come her way. She knew testifying in court wouldn't be easy. Reliving that night, describing every painful detail would force her to confront emotions she'd rather leave buried. But she also knew it was necessary. Justice couldn't happen without truth, and she owed it to herself and to everyone watching to tell her story fully and honestly. Throughout this process, Maya leaned heavily on her faith and resilience. She journaled late at night, pouring her thoughts onto paper as a way to process everything she was feeling. She spent quiet mornings outside, letting the fresh air clear her mind. And whenever doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about holding one officer accountable. It was about challenging a system that had failed too many people for too long. By the time the trial date was set, Maya felt as prepared as she could be. She still felt nervous, how could she not? But she also felt determined to face Officer Dawson in court, determined to make sure her voice was heard. And most importantly, determined to prove that no matter how hard someone tries to knock you down, you can always rise again. Little did she know, the courtroom drama was only the beginning. What awaited her inside those walls would test her strength in ways she never imagined, but it would also reveal just how powerful unity and perseverance could be. The day of the trial arrived, and the small courtroom in Millridge was packed to capacity. Every seat was taken. Friends, family, activists, reporters, and even curious locals filled the room. The air buzzed with tension as people whispered, among themselves, speculating about what might happen. For Maya, walking into that space felt surreal. She had spent months preparing for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare her for the weight of it all. Her wheelchair rolled softly across the tiled floor as she made her way to the plaintiff's table, flanked by her lawyer and a few close supporters. Despite the nerves bubbling inside her, she held her head high, determined not to let fear take over. On the other side of the room sat Officer Dawson, his face pale and expressionless. He avoided eye contact with anyone, especially Maya, as he, defense attorney, a sharp-tongued man known for defending controversial clients, was already shuffling papers and whispering instructions into his ear. The contrast between the two sides couldn't have been starker, one fighting for justice, the other clinging to denial. When the judge called the court to order, the room fell silent. The proceedings began with opening statements. Maya's lawyer stood first, her voice steady and commanding as she laid out the facts of the case. She didn't mince words, painting a vivid picture of what happened that night. "This isn't just about an officer making a mistake," she said, locking eyes with the jury. "This is about abuse of power, prejudice, and a complete disregard for human dignity. My client, Maya Thompson, was targeted because of who she is, a disabled woman simply trying to live her life. The Rock and Sina weren't physically present in the courtroom, but their influence loomed large. They had submitted written statements to be read aloud during the trial, and when the judge allowed them to be shared, the room seemed to hold its breath. Their words were heartfelt and powerful, emphasizing Maya's strength and resilience while condemning the actions of Officer Dawson. "I've known Maya for years," the Rock's statement began. "And if there's one thing I can tell you about her, it's that she doesn't back down from a challenge. She fights not just for herself but for others who don't have a voice. What happened to her that night was cruel and unacceptable, and we won't rest until justice is served." John Sina's statement echoed similar sentiments. "Maya represents everything good in this world: kindness, determination, and courage. Seeing someone treat her with such disrespect shook me to my core. This case isn't just about holding one person accountable. It's about sending a message that no one is above the law." Their words resonated deeply, leaving many in the courtroom visibly moved. Even some jurors exchanged glances, nodding slightly as they absorbed the emotional weight of the testimony. When it came time for Maya to take the stand, the atmosphere shifted. All eyes turned to her as she adjusted her wheelchair at the witness box. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained strong as she recounted the events of that fateful evening. She described pulling into the driveway, noticing Officer Dawson approaching her car, and feeling confusion turn to panic as he grew increasingly aggressive. Her voice wavered only once when she talked about hitting the ground and realizing how vulnerable she was in that moment. "It wasn't just the physical pain," she explained, pausing to collect herself. "It was the humiliation, the feeling that I didn't matter, that my disability made me less worthy of respect, and honestly, I still carry that with me every day." Her honesty struck a chord with everyone listening. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable but undeniably focused. When the prosecutor asked her why she thought Officer Dawson acted the way he did, Maya hesitated before answering. "I don't know for sure," she admitted. "But I do know that people like me are often treated differently. We're underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed entirely. Maybe that's what happened here." Officer Dawson's defense attorney tried to chip away at her credibility during cross-examination, questioning whether she had provoked the altercation or exaggerated her injuries. But Maya remained composed, answering each question calmly and truthfully. Her resolve never faltered even when the attorney suggested she might have misunderstood the situation. "I may use a wheelchair," she replied firmly, "but that doesn't mean I can't see or hear what's happening around me. I know exactly what happened that night, and so does everyone else." As the trial progressed, more evidence came to light. Surveillance footage from nearby homes confirmed Maya's account, showing Officer Dawson acting aggressively without provocation. Witness testimonies from neighbors further corroborated her story, describing how they'd watched in horror as the incident unfolded. One neighbor, an elderly woman who lived next door to the cabin, broke down in tears as she recalled hearing Maya's cries for help. "She didn't deserve that," the woman said, shaking her head. "No one deserves to be treated that way." Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence came from internal records within the Millridge Police Department. During discovery, Maya's legal team uncovered a pattern of misconduct involving Officer Dawson and several of his colleagues. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, and discriminatory behavior had piled up over the years, yet none had resulted in meaningful consequences. These revelations painted a disturbing picture of systemic negligence and reinforced the argument that Officer Dawson's actions weren't isolated. They were part of a broader culture of impunity. By the time closing arguments rolled around, emotions in the courtroom were running high. Maya's lawyer delivered a passionate speech, urging the jury to consider not just the facts of the case but also its broader implications. "This is your chance to make a difference," she told them, "to send a message that we will not tolerate abuse of power, to show the world that justice is possible even when it feels impossible." Officer Dawson's attorney countered with a desperate plea for leniency, arguing that his client had merely been following protocol and reacting to perceived threats. But his words rang hollow compared to the overwhelming evidence stacked against Finally, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. As the foreperson stood to announce the decision, the entire courtroom seemed to freeze. Maya gripped the arms of her wheelchair tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. When the word guilty rang out, a wave of relief washed over her. Tears streamed down her face as she exhaled sharply, the weight of uncertainty finally lifting. Justice had been served, or at least, a step toward it had been taken. For Officer Dawson, the guilty verdict meant jail time, mandatory sensitivity, training, and permanent removal from law enforcement duties. While some argued the punishment didn't go far enough, Maya chose to focus on the progress rather than the shortcomings. After all, this wasn't just about one man. It was about challenging a system that had failed too many for too long. The days following the trial, the ripple effects began to spread. Local leaders in Millridge vowed to implement sweeping reforms within the police department, including stricter oversight, diversity training, and partnerships with community organizations. Activists hailed the verdict as a victory, though they cautioned that much work remained to be done. For Maya, the trial marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, one defined not by victimhood, but by empowerment. Though the scars, both physical and emotional, would always remain, Maya found solace in knowing she had sparked change. With her friends cheering her on and a newfound sense of purpose guiding her steps, she prepared to turn her pain into something greater. Little did she know the best was yet to come. The guilty verdict was a turning point not just for Maya but for the entire town of Millridge. It felt like the first crack in a wall that had stood unchallenged for far too long. For years, people whispered about the misconduct within the Pau police department, but no one dared to speak up loud enough to make a difference. Now, thanks to Maya's courage and persistence, the cracks were widening, exposing deep-rooted issues that couldn't be ignored anymore. Officer Dawson's conviction sent shockwaves through the community. Some residents celebrated openly, feeling vindicated after years of frustration with unchecked authority. Others grumbled under their breath, muttering about overreactions or blaming Maya for making trouble. But even those who disagreed with the outcome couldn't deny that something significant had shifted. The trial wasn't just about one officer. It had become a symbol of accountability, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about how power and prejudice intersected in their own backyard. In the weeks following the verdict, local leaders scrambled to respond. The mayor held an emergency press conference, promising sweeping reforms to rebuild trust between the police department and the community. New policies were announced, including mandatory diversity training, stricter oversight committees, and partnerships with disability advocacy groups. These changes weren't perfect, and many activists argued they didn't go far enough, but they represented progress, a starting point for deeper conversations and actions. For Maya, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The legal battle was over, but its impact lingered in ways she hadn't expected. Physically, her injuries from that night were healing, though some ache still lingered. Emotionally, however, the scars ran deeper. There were nights when sleep eluded her, memories of the incident creeping back uninvited. She'd lie awake, replaying the sound of her phone shattering on the pavement or the cold hardness of the ground beneath her, as Officer Dawson pulled her out of the car. Those moments haunted her, reminders of how quickly safety could slip away. But Maya refused to let those memories define her. Instead, she channeled her pain into purpose. With the support of The Rock and Sina, she decided to turn her experience into action. They brainstormed ideas late into the night, talking about how to amplify voices that had long been silenced. Together, they came up with a plan. Maya would launch a foundation aimed at empowering disabled individuals and advocating for systemic change. The goal was simple yet powerful: to create a world where everyone, regardless of ability, could live without fear of discrimination or mistreatment. The idea took off faster than anyone anticipated. Donations poured in from across the country, fueled by the widespread attention Maya's case had received. Supporters rallied behind her cause, sharing stories of their own struggles and offering resources to help get the foundation off the ground. Volunteers signed up in droves, eager to contribute in any way they could. Even celebrities outside of Maya's inner circle joined the movement, using their platforms to spread awareness and raise funds. One of the most touching moments came when The Rock and John Cena surprised Maya with a video message during a fundraising event. They stood side by side, looking directly into the camera with sincerity etched on their faces. "Maya inspired us," The Rock said, his voice filled with pride. "She turned pain into power, and now she's helping others do the same. That's what real strength looks like." John Cena nodded, adding, "We're not just supporting her, we're standing with her. Because this isn't just her fight, it's all of ours. Let's keep pushing forward until every person is treated with the respect they deserve." Their words resonated deeply, bringing tears to Maya's eyes. It wasn't just the kind words that moved her, it was knowing that she wasn't alone. This journey wasn't hers to carry alone anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in fairness, equality, and justice. As the foundation grew, Maya found herself stepping into a role she never imagined: a leader. She traveled to schools, community centers, and conferences, sharing her story and encouraging others to speak up against injustice. At first, public speaking terrified her, standing in front of crowds reliving the darkest moment of her life. It wasn't easy. But each time she shared her story, she saw the impact it had. People approached her afterward, thanking her for giving them the courage to share their own experiences. Some told her they'd filed complaints against discriminatory practices at work or school. Others said they finally felt seen and heard after years of being overlooked. These interactions reminded Maya why she was doing this. Every hug, every handshake, every heartfelt thank you reinforced her belief that change was possible. And while the road ahead was still long, she knew she was moving in the right direction. Back in Millridge, the effects of the trial continued to ripple outward. The police department faced increased scrutiny, both internally and externally. Officers attended workshops designed to address implicit bias and improve communication with marginalized communities. Community forums became regular events, giving residents a chance to voice concerns and hold officials accountable. Slowly but surely, relationships began to mend, not perfectly but authentically. For Maya, seeing these changes unfold brought a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. She often reflected on how different things might have been if Officer Dawson hadn't attacked her that night. Would she have ever stepped into activism? Would the town have forced itself to confront its flaws? Probably not. Sometimes, she thought bitterly, it took tragedy to spark transformation. But instead of dwelling on bitterness, she chose gratitude for the lessons learned, the connections forged, and the lives touched along the way. Still, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the weight of everything pressed down on her shoulders, Maya wondered if she was strong enough to keep going. Was she really making a difference, or was she just shouting into the void? On those nights, she'd scroll through messages from supporters, reading words of encouragement that reminded her she wasn't fighting alone. One message stood out. "You're planting seeds, Maya. You may not see all the flowers bloom, but they're growing. Trust that." Those words stayed with her, anchoring her during tough times. Change didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't come easily. But every small victory mattered. Every policy changed, every mind opened, every heart softened. Maya reminded herself of that whenever doubt crept in. By the time the foundation celebrated its one-year anniversary, it had grown beyond anything Maya could have dreamed. Grants funded programs teaching self-advocacy skills to disabled youth. Partnerships with businesses created job opportunities for people with disabilities. Awareness campaigns reached millions, sparking dialogue about accessibility and inclusion. Through it all, Maya remained at the center, not as a victim, but as a beacon of hope and resilience. Looking back, she realized how much she'd grown since that fateful night. She wasn't the same person who had sat trembling on the courtroom floor, unsure if justice would ever come. She was stronger now, braver, more determined than ever to leave the world better than she found it. And while the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as reminders of how far she'd come and how much farther she intended to go. As she prepared for the next chapter of her journey, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. With friends by her side and a mission in her heart, she knew anything was possible. After all, she'd already proven that even in the face of darkness, light could shine through, and when it did, it could illuminate the way for others to follow. Years had passed since that fateful night in Millridge, and Maya's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. What started as a painful ordeal became a catalyst for change, not just in her own life, but in the lives of countless others. The foundation she created had grown into a powerhouse of advocacy, reaching communities across the country and inspiring people to demand fairness and equality. It wasn't always easy, and there were days when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. But Maya had learned to lean on her strength, her support system, and the unwavering belief that even small actions could lead to big transformations. One evening, years after the trial, Maya found herself standing backstage at a prestigious awards ceremony. She tugged nervously at the hem of her dress, glancing at her reflection in the mirror. Her wheelchair gleamed under the soft lights, a reminder of how far she'd come and how much she'd overcome. Tonight she was being honored with an award for her work in advocacy. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had stood beside her, believing in the vision of a better world. Still, accepting recognition like this made her feel vulnerable, as though she was putting herself back in the spotlight all over again. As she waited for her turn to take the stage, she spotted two familiar faces sitting in the front row. The Rock and Sina sat side by side, their expressions filled with pride as they gave her subtle thumbs-ups. They hadn't just been supporters, they had become family. Their friendship had carried her through some of the darkest moments, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Seeing them there, cheering her on, brought tears to her eyes. When her name was called, the room erupted in applause. Maya rolled onto the stage, her heart pounding but her spirit steady. As she approached the microphone, she took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. This wasn't just another speech. It was a chance to reflect on everything that had brought her here. "Thank you," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "This award isn't mine alone. It belongs to every person who has ever been told they don't matter, that their voice doesn't count, or that their dreams are too big. You matter. Your voices matter, and your dreams are worth fighting for." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Maya continued, determined to share the full story. "That night changed my life forever," she said, pausing to collect herself. "I went from being someone who thought she was invisible to realizing I had the power to make myself, and others, seen. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I wondered if I was strong enough to keep going. But then I remembered something important. We're stronger together." She glanced toward The Rock and Sina, smiling warmly before turning her attention back to the audience. These two incredible men reminded me of that every step of the way. They didn't just offer words of encouragement, they showed up. They used their platforms to amplify my voice and shine a light on issues most people would rather ignore. And because of them and so many others, I found the courage to keep pushing forward. Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the audience. Maya knew she couldn't tell this story without acknowledging the broader movement it had sparked. "What happened to me wasn't unique," she admitted. "So many people face discrimination, abuse, and neglect simply because of who they are or how they live. My experience opened my eyes to the systemic problems we need to address, not just in law enforcement, but in schools, workplaces, healthcare systems, and beyond." She paused, scanning the room. "We can't stop until every person, regardless of race, ability, gender, or background, is treated with dignity and respect. That's not just a goal, it's a responsibility. We owe it to ourselves, to each other, and to future generations to create a world where no one has to endure what I did, or worse." By now, the room was silent except for the occasional sniffle. Maya's vulnerability struck a chord, reminding everyone present of the human cost of inequality. But she wasn't done yet. She wanted to leave them with hope, a call to action that would inspire them to keep moving forward. "I've learned something important over the past few years," she said, her tone softening. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It's messy, imperfect, and often frustrating. But it's also possible. Every time someone speaks up, stands up, or shows up for someone else, we take one step closer to the world we want to live in. So I'm asking you tonight, not just as advocates but as human beings, to keep showing up, keep speaking out, keep believing that better is possible." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the hall long after Maya finished speaking. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, moved by her honesty and determination. Backstage, The Rock and John Cena greeted her with hugs, their eyes shining with admiration. "You crushed it," The Rock said, his signature grin lighting up his face. "That was perfect." John Cena nodded, adding, "You reminded everyone why we're doing this. Not for fame or recognition, but because it's the right thing to do. You're changing lives, Maya. Never forget that." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. This journey hadn't been easy, and there were still battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel proud, not just of what she'd accomplished, but of the community she'd helped build. Together, they had turned pain into purpose, fear into courage, and injustice into action. In the months and years that followed, Maya continued to push boundaries and challenge norms. The foundation expanded its reach, partnering with international organizations to tackle global issues related to disability rights and social justice. Schools adopted curriculums inspired by Maya's story, teaching students about empathy, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Even Hollywood took notice, producing documentaries and films based on her journey, all with Maya's blessing and involvement. But perhaps the greatest legacy Maya left behind wasn't any award or accolade. It was the ripple effect of her courage. Countless individuals found inspiration in her story, using it as fuel to confront their own challenges and advocate for change. Parents of disabled children reached out to thank her for giving them hope. Activists credited her with reigniting their passion for justice. Strangers sent letters detailing how her example had encouraged them to speak up when they otherwise might have stayed silent. Through it all, Maya remained grounded. She never forgot where she came from, the quiet evenings in Alex's cabin, the terror of that night with Officer Dawson, the overwhelming support of friends and strangers alike. These memories shaped her, reminding her of both the fragility and strength of the human spirit. Looking back, she realized that the hardest moments often led to the greatest growth. That night in Millridge had been devastating, but it had also been transformative. It forced her to confront her fears, find her voice, and use her pain to help others. In doing so, she discovered a truth that would guide her for the rest of her life. Even in the darkest times, there is light. And sometimes, all it takes is one brave soul to let it shine, and shine it did.